So I thought this would be a good starting visual. This is an idealized version I've had of a BIM model constructed by the students possibly, and we're all together experiencing it in VR space as avatars and enjoying kind of the precarious, exciting positions that we can be while we're viewing the model and able to explore all those kind of details. So that kind of sets, I guess, this idea of where I think VR learning experiences might be able to go to. And I wanted to address a few issues in this relatively short presentation. I want to talk about VR as a component of learning, just so that we don't get too carried away with the idea that it's just about remote learning. VR in and of itself offers a lot of opportunities just in the educational process itself. But specifically, we're going to talk about VR as a technology for being remotely located and sharing experiences. Um, and then I want to talk about accessibility and cost, and really throughout this whole thing, because there are students, facilities, and limitations to accessibilities to hardware that can really impact the ability to even realize some of these ideas right now. And I'll also right now start with this idea being BIM inclusive. And this is just a fundamental pedagogical idea that I try to promote. The idea that we can exist within this BIM environment and host all the resources of analysis and other kinds of software plugins with it. And VR can be a component of that without having to take you off into another realm of development. And with that in mind, the idea that VR can be a participant through the whole process, just as BIM can possibly be a participant through the whole process. From the idea of massing models to detailings to physical models, we can keep in the process all of our tools and not be exclusive of any of them. And with that in mind, I think the idea of setting up our workspaces to accommodate that kind of workflow. So here we have the monitor with Revit running, Enscape now, which is affords a quick click of the button access to VR, and then the idea of dedicated personal VR headsets. These are in the $400 range right now, so that we can at any time view our projects, our ideas in virtual space. For us, for remote learning and some of the issues that come along with it, the one of the parts of our decision tree when we're talking about these technologies is whether it's single or multi-user, multiplayer experiences, whether we can all be in the same place at the same time. Because there is software right now that's really very good at single user experiences, and that is Enscape. Um, you click a button, you have your rendering VR headset that you can put on immediately and have a great experience with it. Very well developed. And it doesn't completely eliminate the single user experience. It just means that if we want to experience a Revit model, we'll all be able to see it, but we won't be able to see it together. And that's really a significant, I think, detractor for learning and collaboration. So there are people who are doing that. The Wild, Resolve, these are in development products that offer collaborative multiplayer spaces where everyone can look at the same thing at the same time. The problem we have with accessibility right now and why they're not available as far as the at this moment in the educational space is that they don't have educational offerings and pricings, and some don't even have necessarily complete access to it. And so, once again, I want to come back into this idea. I've done a little work with the idea of what the VR experience has for spatial learning and been spending time thinking about that. Um, I think that one of the most important things that we can benefit our students with is this idea of bringing them into the actual scale of architecture in a way that's really very difficult to do any other way. And so this is kind of this is done very typically now where people will take a photograph, an aerial photograph, do what's called a tilt shift, a manipulation of the optical plane so that the appearance of the object looks like it's in a very small object, so it's model space now. And some manipulations of blur and focus create this idea that really changes our perspective of what our architecture is. It removes that sense of scale. And we can do that in virtual space also with some software. Prospect is one of those that allows us to scale our model down. And the effects of scaling the model down in VR world is that you actually feel like the model is physically smaller, even though you haven't changed anything other than the scale. There's a phenomenon associated with that. And people are trying to do research to kind of better quantify that. And I've done a little bit of experimentation with this idea of interpupillary distances to set this feeling of scale. Um, for the most part, though, I guess in the big picture, the sense of scale is somewhat subtle manipulations, whether a person feels like they're 5'6" or 6 foot tall. Um, but the overall sense of architectural space is really well captured, almost with out-of-the-box settings. And so, keep in mind that there's these wonderful opportunities for students to understand um, the space in ways that's just not provided in two-dimensional representations. And so here's the classical problem that students typically will do. They'll take a photograph of their building, a rendering of it. They'll try to capture the whole tall building. So they'll look up with the camera. They'll distort the relationship of the film plane, and they'll get this convergence of lines. And in virtual reality, that doesn't happen. It's impossible for it to happen. So students experience their architecture in a much more natural, realistic way. And I see that going, this idea that if we really can move into the VR space, we can provide enough software and hardware accessibility to our students. There's many new possibilities of being able to bring our projects together into a common space and then all together walk through them in a virtual way where we're really in a more visceral way experiencing our architecture. Personally, I feel like one of the things we're going to need to do to make that happen is to start working with game developers and using the tools and the power of their software engines for rendering, for multi-user experience, for the ability to play on different platforms. This is a video that will take you to one such company that's doing that and working in that space. And that was Unreal Engine, and this is Unity, which is also has done an experiment. And these are all hyperlinked, so you can go ahead and check them out. But this is the idealized model, and this kind of starts to solve problems that we might have. The idea of a hosted model, two people in remote locations. In this case, in the experiment, they're actually physically manipulating or virtually manipulating objects in space, which could be architectural objects, and both having input and control over it through a shared model. And then this is Cooper Union. Just to finish up, this is Cooper Union's uh, virtual student presentation this year. I'll take you out to it. It's built on a gaming engine, so I think it can show you the power of the platform. Really advanced. So here we have a virtual exhibit of all the students' projects, and you can move through the space. Because it's based on a gaming engine, it's very easy to move this into virtual space and have a three-dimensional immersive experience. And on top of that, it's possible for other people to play in this space, so to speak. But even so, this is now a three-dimensional, very complex presentation of a lot of information and data, and really an exciting idea of what the potential we have to move into this VR remote learning space.